Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Brian Kelly, the LSU Tigers working their way through fall camp until we said this a week ago. I still believe it to be true. There's not many programs that are more fascinating to follow during fall camp than this LSU program, specifically on the defensive side of the football, where so many starting spots within this LSU defense seem to be up for grabs. Now, the first thing that kind of stands out to me from the first couple LSU fall camp practices, at least from what we're hearing, is that I think Blake Baker has just a better feel for how to use his personnel than what we saw in 2023 under Matt House, where, for lack of better terms, it was a disaster in terms of getting guys in the right spot. And at the end of the day, we like to overcomplicate the game of college football. At the end of the day, it's about getting your best players in the right spots to be successful. And I feel like Blake Baker just has a clearer picture of how to use a lot of personnel, specifically in the back end of this LSU defense. Want to get into a few guys that are standing out that I think are massive storylines for LSU. More importantly, what these rotations are going to look like for this LSU defense. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, one, to the LSU fans, we know you all been reading the fall camp notes as well. Would love to hear the names that are catching your guys' eyes in the comments section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. The amount of support from the LSU fans has been absolutely amazing. We can't thank you guys enough. And Dill, without further ado, I want to start with my most important standout player. That is safety Ashton Stamps. And Dill, why I think this is such a massive storyline, as we're going to get this advertisement out of the way here. Dill, if LSU can find their true cornerback one, I feel like that's going to make the picture so much more clear in terms of how you want this LSU defensive backfield to look like in 2024.
I think that's a huge thing. And you saw how big of an issue it felt like last year. It was just kind of figuring out who was going to play what role in that LSU secondary. And again, injuries were certainly a part of it, but I think you said it right. The identification of getting guys in the right spots, playing the right positions certainly seemed like an issue. And I think it all kind of emanated from their lack of ability to find anyone consistent to make it happen at that corner spot. So again, if you can get Ashton Stamps to take that role on, be the number one guy, and then I think you see a battle with Zy Alexander. And frankly, I think PJ Woodland's going to be it. I think those two battle for that CB2 position. I think those two have the best potential to play what Blake Baker wants to do in terms of that press man coverage, be able to be sticky consistently. Because when they're at their, or when Missouri was at their best, it was when they had those two cornerbacks who are absolute dudes and able to play that kind of tough, aggressive coverage that Baker wanted. I think PJ Woodland certainly has the physical traits to do it. Obviously, we'll have to see him put that together. But I think you do have guys like Zy Alexander and even a guy like J.K. Johnson. I don't want to pretend he can't do it either. I think those guys will battle it out for that second spot.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is you're hearing a lot of buzz around Sage Ryan working as a boundary cornerback. I personally, again, Blake Baker's smarter than me, but I personally like Sage Ryan more at the safety spot or at the star spot. And maybe as a guy like Javion Toviano and Zy Alexander and J.K. Johnson continue to kind of get back to 100%, maybe you see Sage Ryan go back to that safety spot where I think he's better suited. I don't hate cross-training some guys because you are going to have to shuffle the deck at some point in this LSU defense. Dill, PJ Woodland's a guy that's going to be really hard to keep off the field. You go back to that spring game, and it's so fascinating because we covered him when he committed to LSU, but we said he'd probably need a year to get a little bit more physical before he could play year one in the SEC. PJ Woodland says, I don't need that year. I'm going to be ready to go year one. I think that's a fascinating storyline. Major Burns playing that star spot. I really like that. You want Major Burns around the line of scrimmage.
He's another guy that you just felt like maybe mishandled a little bit because I don't think he's a super rangy guy to play that kind of free safety role that he was playing last year. But when he was around the line of scrimmage and able to make plays, really instinctive, really good around that point part of the game. And then you kind of look, even you got a guy like Sage Ryan, for example, or even a Sean Spears or Jordan Allen, who you might think have that better ball skills, a little bit more range, some of the things you look for in really quality safety play. Again, you just look, can you get more or can you get you guys in better spots? I shouldn't have left out Jordan Gilbert because I think he's kind of the one guy you pencil in to start at that safety room. But I think that to me is one of the other kind of conversations of how do you deal with that nickel role and that safety role? Because even last year, you go back, it didn't feel like they had a great answer for it.
Yeah, I'm just hoping for some more continuity, like guys just getting used to playing that position and kind of growing as a unit in terms of chemistry. Because I think the communication on the back end was a disaster, giving up a lot of blown coverages and explosive plays. My odds are going to be on Zy Alexander because I think he fits what Blake Baker wants to do. I think there's going to be a lot of press man coverage, which I'm a fan of. I think there is some talent in the room to run that type of stuff. Zy Alexander's big, long, he's physical. Thought he played really well before the injury. If he can get back to what we saw in 2023 before the injury, I think that's a really quality starting cornerback in the SEC as well. The off-ball linebacker spot we think is going to be a really strong unit for LSU. Haven't got that much intel in terms of how Harold Perkins is going to be used. Again, I just trust Blake Baker to use Harold Perkins the right way. I think the other fascinating conversations on the defensive front, and I want to focus on Deshaun Womack, who, again, it's hard to evaluate the defense right now because the pads aren't on yet. Get more reps for Deshaun Womack. This is a guy that needs to play football, grow in confidence. Still, I think he's probably the most talented edge rusher on this football team. I think he lacked the physicality as a true freshman, which, again, is to be expected. A lot of these kids who are coming in as true freshmen along the SEC are going to need a year to get that physicality right. The more reps you can get to Deshaun Womack, and if he can kind of emerge as kind of an elite edge rusher, for lack of better terms, that can get after the passer, that's kind of what I'm keeping my eyeballs on in terms of this LSU defensive front.
Yeah, and just their ability to trust him to go out there and do it. I mean, it does sound like he's starting to earn that sort of right, if you will. Certainly wasn't a wildly trusted guy last year. No. Obviously played kind of sparing duty, if you will. But a guy who, if they can get him rolling and they can get him to the point where he can be an all-down player, can play every game, if you will, that'll be huge. Because I kind of look, I mean, Savion Jones, Parrish Shan, Braden Swinson, all good players, but they're kind of more your physical run-stuffing defensive ends, frankly. I think Deshaun Womack and, frankly, the young guys, Gabriel Relaford, Cobbins, I should say, those guys probably do have a little bit more juice. And some of the traits you look for in great pass rushers, some of that flexibility, that explosiveness, some of those things that, frankly, the other three lack.
I think you're sleeping on Braden Swinson a little bit, but I think Braden Swinson was probably one of the best defensive linemen for LSU last year. I hope you can get another year for Braden.
100% was, but I don't think he'll be Deshaun Womack could be a first-round pick if he puts it together when he's coming out. I'm not sure Braden Swinson ever goes that high.
And then on the inside, again, we're going to talk more about the inside of the defensive line when they get the pads on. One of the more fascinating conversations, you talk about iron sharpening iron. The defensive line is going to see the best offensive line they'll play all year in practice every single day. And so I think that's going to help this defensive line just get better as a unit. It's interesting to see Gio Paz kind of emerge as a guy that they're going to trust in that rotation on the inside of the defensive line. I thought that was a really good pickup. And it kind of flew under the radar, not necessarily to LSU fans, because, again, we are worried about building depth within this defensive line. I think that's a really quality player that's played a lot of football in the Big Ten. Obviously, the eyeballs are going to be on Dominic McKinley, too, as a true freshman. I want to touch on a few storylines on the offensive side of the football, specifically the rushing attack, where I think one of the more underrated conversations within this LSU offense in terms of life after Jaden Daniels, what's the rushing attack going to look like when you don't have a quarterback that is as dynamic as Jaden Daniels? You're going to see a lot of outside zone, and I think Caleb Jackson, who sounds to be emerging during fall camp, is a massive storyline. Dill, I like Josh Williams, but you ask me who is the difference maker in the running back room, it's Caleb Jackson. I think he's perfectly fit for that outside zone system where you're going to get him in space, let him put his foot in the ground and get uphill. This kid's burst is kind of next level for his size. To hear Caleb Jackson kind of becoming, for lack of better terms, potentially that RB1, that's a massive storyline for LSU, getting that run game going post Jaden Daniels.
Especially because they're going to need a guy who's not just a compliment. And frankly, I thought that's kind of what Josh Williams, John Emery, the running backs were last year. They really weren't the focal point of that rushing attack. And frankly, I'm not sure they had the capability of being the focal point in a really, really good rushing attack, because they were good, tough runners inside the tackles, if you will. They were able to churn hard yards out, but they just don't have the explosiveness, the twitchiness that Caleb Jackson showed. You go to that Wisconsin game, I mean, some of the ability he showed to make guys miss in the phone booth and then then make plays off of it. Again, I just don't know that the other guys have it. I think it's going to be huge to have him emerge, mainly because of kind of what you said. You got to kind of be the focal point of what they're doing. You need to be able to get the ball to the perimeter, because that was one thing their running backs just didn't have to do last year because it was all Jaden Daniels. So I think having more athletic traits that kind of scream number one running back, if you will, I think that's Caleb Jackson. He needs to be the guy.
I haven't seen anything about Caden Durham yet, and I know he wasn't in for spring, so it might be a little bit of a longer burn for him in terms of maybe not being involved early in the season. He's got game-breaking speed. I'm just kind of interested to see how he gets used in this LSU offense. And the last two things I want to kind of close out on, and I want to get your take on this, and I want to get the LSU fans' takes on this. Some two tight end sets that LSU's working on. I don't know how I feel about it. And again, I'm sitting here critiquing Joe Sloan. Joe Sloan's so much smarter than me, Dill. But I'm going to do it anyways. Do we really want to run that much two tight end set with how loaded this LSU wide receiver room is? Kind of going back to the conversation we just had in terms of you want to get your best football players on the field. I look at this wide receiver room and say that there's going to be a lot of casual national media analysts kind of discrediting this wide receiver room because on paper you lose two studs in Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors. I look at this LSU wide receiver and say it's going to be a top 10 unit in the country. I like the tight ends. I like true freshman Trey Green. I obviously love Mason Taylor. My question to you is, do you want to see LSU go to so many two tight end sets when you have all that talent in the wide receiver room? You feel like you just want to get them on the field.
And I get that argument because, again, LSU's problem is not talent in the wide receiver room. It's probably trying to keep everyone engaged, keep everyone happy, feed everyone, if you will, because they're, again, a similar problem to what they had last year. There's just a lot of really, really good players. But I do kind of think, their best position group at the end of the day is the offensive line. If this team wants to play physical and really tough and grind teams down, just running the football kind of the old school way, the way Georgia does, the way Michigan was doing last year, I think they very much have the capability of doing it. And that could be where you could see two tight end sets, just increasing the number of gaps teams have to account for and allowing their offensive line to really go to work and make it happen, because that is to me the best unit.
I feel like my question is, do we need two tight ends to get this LSU running game going?
Probably not, because they didn't need it last year. They didn't need it in the spring because their offensive line is really clean and they don't miss a whole lot of blocks.
And I also go to Georgia and Michigan and say, I'm a Michigan fan. It made sense for Michigan to play two tight ends. We ain't got squat in the wide receiver room. So I look at LSU and say, well, I want to personally get as many wide receivers as I can get on the football field. Again, Joe Sloan's going to figure it out. It's a very good problem to have. Kyron Lacey seems to be the wide receiver one, which I think is extremely impressive because I look at CJ Daniels and say, man, that kid probably would have won late day two in the NFL draft. That's how good CJ Daniels was at Liberty. You're going to have so many difference makers in this wide receiver room. I think a lot of people sleeping on it. Dill, we'll cut it there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. A lot of storylines to come out of LSU. Hey, once the pads get on, the bullets start flying a little bit more, we'll have a little bit more to talk about. Appreciate y'all rocking with it. Again, if you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.